Exactly 1 week since we woke up to the news that October 7 mastermind Yahya Sinwar was eliminated. Many of you would have seen my reaction to that and my subsequent thoughts on the shameless hypocrisy we saw in the aftermath from many Western leaders. A point so obvious to me, and most of you, that in some way, shape or form you'd think it would have had to have been to them as well. Think again. Let's check in and see what, shall we call it, lessons learned, if any, over the past 7 days. Let's start at the top. US President Joe Biden, after blaming Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for the deaths of 6 hostages, who, by the way, were shot brutally by Hamas terrorists, then went on to applaud the killing of Sinwar. But not even a day later, here he is.
There's an opportunity, in my view, and my colleagues agree, that we can probably deal with Israel and Iran in a way that ends the conflict for a while.
Say that again?
It ends the conflict. In other words, it stops the back and forth.
It really does get tiring, doesn't it? Where do I start? Maybe at the end. It stops the back and forth, he says. President, there ain't no back and forth. It's just been forth for nearly a year. One-way traffic from Hezbollah and a mass murder from Hamas. And the only back has been the desperate attempt to end the threat and free the hostages. The middle now. We can probably deal with Israel and Iran. I'm sorry, Iran is trying to destroy you. Yes, all of us in the West. And you are lumping them in with Israel, a democratic ally, as though there is some type of equivalence. There's not. And my favourite, the start. My colleagues agree, he says. Mr. President, the endorsement of your colleagues is hardly comforting. In fact, it is utterly terrifying, particularly if you are referring to VP Kamala Harris, who, after trying to take credit for Sinwar's death, remember, we will always bring you to justice, agreed with a protester that Israel was committing genocide.
Billions of dollars, 2,000 people dead, 19,000 children are dead. 19,000 children are dead.
Listen, what he's talking about, it's real.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken renewed calls for a ceasefire in the days following and reiterated them in person to Netanyahu overnight in Jerusalem. Our Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, in Washington for an International Monetary Fund meeting, is going to make an economic case for a ceasefire in the Middle East because, of course, no one involved realises war is expensive. Once they do, surely they'll lay down arms. Is he saying that Jews fighting jihadists is responsible for inflation? Sounds like it. I suspect he needs to look just a little closer to home. Our Foreign Minister, after demanding no entry into Rafah, where Sinwar was found, of course, continued her calls for a ceasefire too, even accusing opposition leader Peter Dutton of being extreme because he refuses to back them. She argues his stance is at odds with the international community, including the US. She's right, it is, and so it should be. All of these countries are still calling for a ceasefire. They don't get it, and if they do, they're doing a mighty job of pretending otherwise. I'm going to try and put this really simply in the hope that maybe even one of them might be able to understand. A ceasefire does not end the violence. There was a ceasefire in place on October 6. The country you keep calling on for one did not break it. Terrorists, by their very nature, are not particularly law-abiding, and that's putting it politely. So you can't just sign a little ceasefire and trust they'll follow suit. Again, this isn't rocket science. Hamas and Hezbollah and the like have demonstrated this time and time again. A ceasefire does not eliminate the very real threat. And there's not one Western country in the world that would ever allow their people to be slaughtered over and over again. And listen to any fanciful calls from others too. The war can end today if Hamas returns the hostages and surrenders. Apart from Netanyahu, where are the calls for that? Why do so many in positions of power call for a ceasefire as though the two warring parties are equals, are both rational, both sane? The enemy here does not want peace. They don't even care if their own people die. They crave death and destruction on a level that is hard to comprehend, yes, but so easy to see. They ain't hiding it. In fact, we've been given a front row seat to the horrors they commit, yet world leaders shut their eyes and wax lyrical about ceasefire negotiations. You cannot negotiate with people who see death as an honour, enhanced if they take out a few non-believers on the way. It doesn't work. So not that anyone in power is going to listen or, I don't know, maybe even cares. But I call on all of those heaping immense pressure on Israel to cease fire in a war they didn't start and cannot end until their people are home, to maybe try a change of tact. I mean, it might sound utterly ridiculous, probably fanciful, but maybe, just maybe, those of us who purport to share the values of life, freedom, democracy and peace could possibly band together and put pressure on, look, controversial, I know, but maybe, just maybe, the Iranian regime. It's probably silly and, look, confusing too. Why would we try to force an evil regime to stop killing innocent people, including their own, via proxies and the like, when we can instead pressure the country they are attacking to stop defending themselves? You're right, silly idea. But seriously, the whole thing is bat beep crazy. The media continues to perpetuate the myth that Israel is the aggressor and warmongering.
Israel is vowing the war will go on.
No, again, Israel has vowed to end the war. They just need their people back first and the murderers to surrender. Not for ideological reasons or to save face, but because it's the only way the terrorists will stop killing. That could happen now. The LA Times earlier in the week. A violent end for Hamas leader who allegedly plotted October 7 attacks. Allegedly. I mean, I checked today and they fixed it, but how did that ever get through? He himself, Sinwar that is, told a rally in Gaza the December before last year's attack that Hamas would do the following to Israel, and I quote, "We will come to you, God willing, in a roaring flood. We will come to you with endless rockets. We will come to you in a limitless flood of soldiers. We will come to you with millions of our people, like the repeating tide." Just 9 months later, his terror group did exactly as he said they would, allegedly. Come on. And just a reminder, by the way, because we say October 7 so often these days, it can feel a little bit removed from reality. This is particularly for all those who have marched for the children since October 7 and continue to do so, waving the flags of terrorists. Abel, Shakar and Omer, burned alive with mum and dad by Hamas terrorists. Imagine how scared they would have been, how much it would have hurt. How anyone could side with the monsters who did this is unfathomable, and yes, it's emotional. I'm a mother. Should be emotional for everyone. And in news this week that will come as a complete surprise to the sum total of no one, Israel says 6 Al Jazeera journalists have been exposed as Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists, presenting evidence via documents seized in Gaza. Al Jazeera say these have been fabricated. Come on. Israel isn't perfect, no country is, but given the fact the world is continually forcing them to justify every move, including sending US, UK and Australian generals over to investigate during the war, there's no way they'd ever get away with something so stupid. So I, for one, am going with the democratic nation's version of events. Remember when the IDF raided the Al Jazeera offices in the West Bank and shut them down around a month ago? And Al Jazeera said, targeting journalists is always aiming to erase the truth and prevent people from hearing the truth. The government media office in Gaza at that time said, "We call on all media organisations and groups that deal with human rights in the world to condemn this heinous crime that is a blatant violation of press and media freedom." I'll tell you what's a worse, in fact, real violation of freedom, being brutally slaughtered by terrorists. I've said it before and I'll say it again. A lack of strong, clear moral leadership has not only let Israel down, but the vast majority of us who see this for what it is. Democracy versus terror. Life versus death. Good versus evil. And the sooner those in power stop pandering to extremist minorities